In early 2023, a Finnish forestry survey drone flying over the uninhabited region of northern Karelia captured an anomaly buried beneath layers of moss and permafrost. A vast, circular depression ringed by concrete segments, its geometry too precise to be natural. Days later, a team of environmental engineers dispatched to the coordinates 16.67N, found a sealed access hatch welded shut with Cyrillic warning signs half erased by decades of decay. Radiation counters spiked briefly, then fell silent. When the hatch was cut open, the air inside was still warm. Within weeks, a classified memo circulated among European intelligence agencies referencing Object 643K, an abandoned Soviet installation last logged in 1968 and rumored to have been constructed over a captured German research facility from 1944. No public statement was issued. Yet satellite images began disappearing from online databases, and independent journalists who tried to reach the site reported unmarked vehicles shadowing them along forest roads. Something buried under the Red Lake had begun to wake from its half-century of silence. Chapter 1. The Red Lake Discovery. The coordinates first appeared in a dataset compiled by the Finnish Geological Survey's Drone Imaging Division in January 2023. At first, the anomaly was flagged as a potential sinkhole, one of many formed by shifting permafrost in Karelia's subarctic forests. But when technician Lasse Hietala adjusted the infrared filters, the image revealed concentric heat signatures radiating from beneath the surface, symmetrical, structured, and unmistakably artificial. The data was forwarded to the Finnish Ministry of the Environment, but within 48 hours, access to the file, survey 643K polarscan.img, was restricted. By the time journalists obtained a copy through a leaked backup, the location tag had already been redacted. The first on-site footage came from a freelance documentarian, Alina Koronen, who reached the area with 2 colleagues in late February. Her handheld camera recorded what appeared to be a reinforced access hatch sunken in the ground, its rim lined with faded warning stencils. Objekt 643K, Dostup Zapression. Object 643K, access forbidden. The weld seams were thick, uneven, suggesting it had been sealed hastily, likely after abandonment. Around the perimeter, the remains of power pylons protruded from the earth, their ceramic insulators cracked by frost. When Alina touched the hatch's surface, her thermal reader registered a residual warmth of 4 degrees above ambient, impossible for a structure buried for decades. Finnish defense forces arrived at the site 2 days later, citing environmental contamination. Koronen's footage was confiscated, but by then, a short clip had already circulated online. A 5-second shot of the hatch opening a few centimeters before an unseen force slammed it shut. The original file, RDLK footage, clip3.mov, was later traced to a deleted cloud server registered under a shell account in Tallinn. No one has claimed responsibility for the upload. Declassified Soviet archives released after 1991 contain only one direct reference to Object 643K, a 1959 memorandum from the Karelian Military District to the Ministry of Media Machine Building, labelled Project MIR-7. The memo describes field tests of atmospheric resonance communications and post-war acquisition of German research assets, facility inherited from OKW Division W. The mention of OKW, Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, Division W, responsible for advanced weapons and energy research during the final years of World War II, immediately caught the attention of historians. Cross-referenced with surviving Wehrmacht files, investigators found a match, a construction order issued in November 1944 under codename Project ROTSI, detailing a subterranean laboratory intended for ionospheric interference measurement. The last recorded activity from the German side ceased in March 1945, days before Soviet forces captured the region. By early April 2023, environmental survey teams reported faint electrical activity emanating from beneath the Red Lake Basin. Engineers deployed ground-penetrating radar, revealing a circular complex approximately 120 meters in diameter, with multiple chambers radiating from a central hub. One chamber, marked on blueprints as Test Zentrum 4, showed dense metallic reflections consistent with large equipment or shielding. Power readings indicated that a minimal current, less than 2 volts, was still circulating in the buried system. Theories emerged of geothermal feedback, but chemical analysis of nearby soil found traces of tellurium and beryllium, materials used in early radar and radiation shielding technologies. A turning point came when a retired Soviet radio engineer, Viktor Shaposhnikov, now 89, contacted Finnish researchers after recognizing the object 643K designation from his service records. In a recorded interview, he recalled a 1967 operation codenamed Chasovaya, the Hour Hand. He described working at a remote installation near the Finnish border, testing long-range atmospheric echo transmitters. According to his memory, the facility's power source was not conventional. It was built on something they found, he said quietly. A machine or generator from the Germans. We only maintained the Soviet parts. He refused to elaborate further, claiming the project was shut down after an accident that burned half the underground section. Investigators later confirmed that a forest fire had indeed been recorded in the area in September 1968, reported in local newspapers as a lightning-induced blaze. But meteorological logs from the same period showed clear skies that entire week. The fire's origin, based on modern analysis of char depth in surviving trees, suggested intense localized heat, possibly electrical discharge. In June 2023, a joint expedition between Finnish archaeologists and international media gained conditional permission to revisit the Red Lake site under armed escort. They found that most of the surface access points had already been dismantled by unidentified contractors. However, a secondary shaft located 200 meters northeast of the main depression remained partially open. Inside, the group discovered reinforced corridors descending into compacted soil lined with rusted copper conduits. Faded Soviet signage led them to a chamber filled with fragments of control panels and a single intact object. A sealed steel crate stamped with dual insignia. A German eagle overlaid by a Soviet hammer and sickle. The crate was transported to a secure laboratory in Helsinki under catalogue number RDLK 23014. Radiation readings were negligible, yet the crate emitted a steady electromagnetic pulse at 12.4 Hz, repeating every 27 seconds. When opened under controlled conditions, it contained a spool of magnetic tape, several vacuum tubes, and a metal plate engraved in both German and Russian. Zentralfeld Resonanz, einheitlich, срок 4, объединенное поле резонанса, 1949. The inscription translated roughly to Unified Field Resonance. No further explanation was provided. Publicly, the discovery was dismissed as Cold War experimental debris. Privately, multiple intelligence agencies requested copies of the artifact's data signature. The Helsinki Lab's report, document TORFI MOD 643K1A, was classified within hours of submission. Within weeks, Elina Korhonen disappeared while traveling to Tallinn for an interview with a former KGB technician who claimed to have worked on Project MIR7. Her car was found abandoned near the ferry terminal, engines still running, camera missing. Today, Object 643K remains sealed once again. The Finnish government cites ongoing environmental stabilization as the reason for continued exclusion zones. But those who have heard the recovered tape insist it is not white noise. It is a pattern, precise, deliberate, and eerily human in cadence, broadcasting faintly through the static from beneath the frozen ground of Red Lake. Chapter 2. The Lost Project Morgenröte. When Germany's Federal Maritime and Hydrographic Agency conducted a sonar survey of the Baltic seabed in 2019, its intent was purely environmental to map sediment displacement along the Rügen shelf. Yet among the low-resolution sonar images, a series of anomalies appeared, parallel lines intersecting at perfect right angles, stretching nearly a kilometre beneath the coastal shelf. At first, dismissed as glacial formations, the data drew the attention of marine archaeologist Dr. Jonas Kappel, who identified the geometric regularity as characteristic of wartime military engineering. His team secured limited permission to explore the site under the pretext of historical preservation. What they found beneath the silt was not a wreck, but a sealed tunnel complex extending inland, reinforced with steel beams stamped with Reichsadler, insignia and serial numbers dated February 1945. The first chamber revealed a rusted door bearing the inscription Projekt Morgenröte, Abteilung V, a reference that appeared nowhere in German military archives. Preliminary exploration exposed abandoned equipment, glass cylinders wrapped in lead foil, pressure valves, and oxygen tanks labelled with the symbol of the Heereswaffenamt, the Army Ordnance Office. Most disturbing were rows of concrete compartments along the far wall, each roughly the size of a human body. Inside one, divers found a skeletal form in a shredded Luftwaffe uniform, the insignia still legible. A tag tied to the uniform read simply, Versuch 32A. The discovery sent a shockwave through the research community, triggering an immediate lockdown by the German Federal Police. Within weeks, all access was revoked and Kappel's footage was confiscated. However, fragments of his dive logs leaked through an anonymous source in Lübeck. One entry, dated May 18, 2019, reads, Observed sealed lab, thick glass panels, interior markings, Sonnenlicht, Morgenröte, radiation counter elevated. The term Sonnenlicht, sunlight, had been used in several wartime documents recovered from Peenemünde, referencing experiments involving ultraviolet and particle exposure for sterilization and chemical acceleration. Cross-referencing archives at the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz, historians uncovered fragments of an SS correspondence dated March 3, 1945. Morgenröte relocation approved. Priority Alpha. Transport secured via Rügen route under 3rd Naval Logistics Command. The message bore the signature of General Hans Kammler, known for overseeing secret weapons programs during the war's final months. The next clue came unexpectedly. In early 2020, a classified report from the German Federal Intelligence Service, BND, marked vertraulich, nur für den Dienstgebrauch, surfaced through parliamentary leaks. The report confirmed that unidentified biological containers had been recovered from the Rügen tunnel complex and transferred to a containment facility near Hamburg. One section of the file, labelled Attachment C, Redacted Witness Account, contained the testimony of a naval engineer who claimed to have been stationed at a temporary laboratory on the island in late April 1945. His statement read, The experiments involved aerosol dispersal under simulated atmospheric conditions. The objective was rapid degradation of enemy food storage. We were told it was harmless, but one of the assistants died after exposure. Historians initially doubted the testimony until declassified. Allied intercepts from May 1945 confirmed a series of encrypted radio transmissions between Peenemünde and an unregistered station on Rügen using the call sign ARX05. The content of those messages remains partially decoded, but one phrase recurs. Testphase Morgenröte abgeschlossen. Übergabe an Einheit Ostwind, meaning test phase, dawn complete. Transfer to Unit East Wind. The identity of Unit East Wind remains a mystery. In the autumn of 2021, British researchers from King's College uncovered a US Office of Strategic Services, OSS, microfilm cataloguing confiscated German documents post-1945. One entry, Film Roll 27B12, listed Morgenröte biophysical field documentation, probable intelligence transfer to Soviet custody, and 1946. This confirmed long-standing suspicions that elements of the Morgenröte program were absorbed by Soviet authorities, possibly re-engineered under Cold War atmospheric studies. When investigative journalist Lena Bauer visited Rügen in 2022, she tracked down retired East German naval officer Dieter Müller, who had guarded a classified coastal site during the 1950s. Müller recalled underground tunnels filled with sealed chambers and humming equipment. He described crates labelled Institut für Luftbiologie, USSR zone being loaded onto trucks bound for Rostock. We were told they contained filtration units, he said, but I remember one crate leaking liquid that ate through paint. In late 2022, Bauer obtained photographs from a former BND analyst showing the contents of one recovered container. Inside was a cylindrical glass capsule, half filled with a pale suspension. The label, though damaged, bore the words Projekt Morgenröte, Sonnenlichtkulturserie C. Microscopic examination revealed unidentified organic matter with structural similarities to extremophilic bacteria, genetically altered beyond known mid-20th century capabilities. The material was destroyed during containment failure in 2023, according to an internal report later leaked to the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. By 2024, the Rügen tunnels had been resealed under federal order, and the German Ministry of Defense issued a brief statement citing hazardous chemical remnants. Yet internal correspondence, Document G443-2024 revealed ongoing joint analysis with NATO laboratories under the codename Project Solaris. The objective? To determine whether the Morgenröder samples represented an early attempt at biological or radiological adaptation technology designed to modify atmospheric resilience or disease resistance. To the public, the story was buried as another Cold War curiosity, but buried in the digital archives of the Federal Intelligence Service. File De Morgue, 1958, restricted, contains a single photograph that defies dismissal. A Soviet scientist standing beside a chamber marked with the same Morgenröder insignia, taken in 1953 inside a facility identified as Object 643K beneath Red Lake, Karelia. The image closes the circle between Nazi Germany's dying experiments and the Soviet Union's hidden inheritance. A continuum of silence spanning two regimes, two wars, and one buried truth. Chapter 3. Operation Glass Veil Exposed. The first whisper of Operation Glass Veil surfaced in 2018 when an archivist at the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration in College Park, Maryland, discovered a sealed film canister mislabeled Arctic Weather Recon, 1958. Inside were microfilm reels bearing the insignia of the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. Each frame carried the same project code, GV01. The archivist, unaware of its sensitivity, included the canister in a public digitization batch. Within hours of upload, the file disappeared from the system, and a quiet notice was sent to the office of the historian at Langley, citing erroneous release of restricted content. But not before several researchers downloaded fragments of the scanned index. The first line read, Mission Brief, Operation Glass Veil, Ellesmere Sector Recovery, 4 March 1958. Ellesmere Island, at the northernmost edge of Canada, had long been home to abandoned Cold War installations. Yet no record existed of any joint Anglo-American operation in that sector. When investigative journalist Daniel Rees began cross-referencing declassified RAF reports, he located a 1959 document, MI6 North Arctic Reconnaissance Log 4259, detailing a cooperative mission between the CIA and MI6 under the command of Colonel Thomas Ashcroft. The stated objective: retrieval of a downed Soviet experimental aircraft carrying optical reconnaissance equipment of potential technological advantage. What caught Rees's attention was the date discrepancy. Soviet records list no aircraft losses in that region until 1960. In August 2020, a Canadian glaciology team working on Project Ice Relic encountered metallic debris protruding from a receding glacier 60 kilometers west of the Ward Hunt ice shelf. The debris matched the dimensions of a 1950s Soviet reconnaissance craft, specifically the unaccounted for Yak-25RV Mandrake. When the team reported the find to the Canadian Armed Forces, military personnel immediately secured the site. Rees, alerted through a contact in Ottawa, arrived weeks later to find the area sealed and airspace restricted. What little footage he captured showed fragments of fuselage painted in faded Cyrillic, Soyuz 47, Novosibirsk. Months later, an anonymous source identifying himself as K sent Rees a series of scanned documents from what appeared to be British intelligence archives, marked Top Secret, Operation Glass Veil, 1958-1963. Among them was a memorandum dated 9 March 1958. Recovery successful. Flight hardware intact. Subject: KV-12 lens assembly. Immediate transfer to Groom Lake, Nevada. The memo included the signature of General Curtis LeMay, then head of the U.S. Strategic Air Command. But the attachment, 3 blurred photographs, was what truly shifted the investigation. The images depicted a spherical device approximately 2 meters in diameter, partially covered in frost, surrounded by personnel in U.S. Air Force cold weather gear. Stenciled across its surface, KV-12, Programma Gallo, translation, Program Halo. The Halo designation did not appear in any Soviet research catalogue. However, in 2021, declassified portions of the CIA's 1960 Arctic Communications Study referenced residual anomalies in atmospheric sampling following Halo recovery operations. The phrasing implied that the device's purpose was not reconnaissance at all, but rather atmospheric measurement or manipulation. A memo from the British Joint Intelligence Committee in 1959 warned that Project Halo may involve field-scale ionospheric modulation, potentially disrupting NATO radar and communication frequencies. Intrigued, Rees collaborated with retired Air Commodore Peter Landry, who had served at RAF Fylingdales during the early 1960s. Landry recalled rumors of an object too advanced for either side being studied at a US facility under tight NATO oversight. He described engineers speaking of field interference patterns, a term consistent with early ionospheric research. His personal notes included a fragmentary reference to Operation Glass Veil, Phase 2, Containment, through FOIA requests filed in 2022. Rees uncovered partial logs from the US Air Weather Service. File series AWS 1959 Arctic. One entry, dated 14th of April 1959, reads, Phase 2 failure, personnel exposure recorded. Recommend indefinite suspension. The file ends abruptly, followed by a missing page notation. When Rees confronted the Department of Defense spokesperson about the entry, he was told the document was incomplete and unverifiable. In November 2022, the story took a darker turn. A former CIA technician, codenamed E, agreed to meet Rees in Reykjavik. The man, frail and in his 80s, produced a single acetate sheet with handwritten notes referencing Project Halo, Project Halcyon, and Crosslink Node 12. According to E, Operation Glass Veil had not been a recovery mission, it was a controlled handoff. The Soviets had staged the aircraft's crash to transfer experimental hardware to the West in exchange for captured German scientists who'd worked on high-altitude frequency research under the Luftwaffe. It wasn't about who built it, he whispered. It was about who could make it stop. Soon after their meeting, E's hotel room was found empty. The only item left behind was an envelope addressed to Rees, containing a strip of film showing the same spherical device seen in the 1958 photographs. This time, however, the markings were clearer. Halo Unit 3, Morgenröte Integration Sequence. The link between the Rügen discovery and Operation Glass Veil was undeniable. By early 2023, Rees attempted to publish his findings through the Atlantic Chronicle. Before release, the publication received a federal injunction citing national security interests. The editorial servers were seized, and Rees's credentials were revoked under suspicion of unauthorized possession of classified materials. He vanished from public view shortly thereafter. Today, Operation Glass Veil exists in the historical record only as a line item in a 1964 Senate Intelligence Committee Index. GVS-01, Arctic Retrieval Program, terminated. But within the fragmented archives of multiple nations lies a shadow network of documents connecting the Arctic recovery, the Rügen Vault and the Soviet Red Lake site. Each event, decades apart, converges on the same terminology: resonance transmission, unification, and buried at the heart of it all, an unanswered question that has haunted every investigator since 1958. What did both superpowers discover in the dying days of the Second World War that made them hide the truth not from each other but from everyone else? Chapter 4, The Vanishing Files of Unit 731B. In late 2017, a graduate researcher named Aya Nakamura was cataloguing obsolete medical archives at the University of Tokyo when she encountered a wooden crate labeled simply Johou Shengsheng, property of Ministry of Health. Inside, beneath stacks of brittle post-war reports, she discovered hundreds of deteriorating microfilm reels marked with an unfamiliar symbol, a black chrysanthemum overlaying a red cross. The reels bore stamped identifiers. Unit 731B, Liaison Manila. At first, she assumed a misfiled batch from Japan's infamous wartime Unit 731. But these reels were dated between 1948 and 1953, years after Japan's surrender. The implications were staggering. Within weeks of her report, the Ministry of Health quietly reclaimed the material, citing biohazard concerns. 2 months later, Nakamura's faculty email was deactivated, and her research funding abruptly terminated. Rumors of a 731B subdivision had long existed within military history circles, an alleged continuation of Japan's wartime biological research, protected and repurposed by occupying US forces during the early Cold War. Until Nakamura's find, it remained speculation. A few surviving witnesses from Allied occupation hinted at strange facilities operating under US Army Medical Command Authority, but no documentation had surfaced. That changed when an anonymous package arrived at Asahi Shimbun's investigative bureau in early 2018. Inside were scans of 4 microfilm frames labeled GHQ SCAP restricted. Biologicals. Each showed English language. Directives authorizing joint medical experimentation under Pacific Command oversight. One memorandum, signed by Major General Charles Willoughby, MacArthur's Chief of Intelligence, referenced post-surrender cooperation with retained Japanese specialists under code SCAMP. The date, April 1947. Historians were divided. Some dismissed the find as an elaborate hoax. Others pointed to corroborating evidence in declassified Pentagon logs referencing Medical Liaison, Far East, Classified Program 731B. The term liaison implied partnership, not prosecution. Further investigation led researchers to Clark Air Base in the Philippines, which, according to archival shipping records from 1948, received sealed containers, biological reference specimens, origin Tokyo. These shipments matched the timeline of GHQ's post-war epidemiological projects. By 2019, Japanese media interest forced the government to issue a statement denying the existence of 731B. But behind the scenes, international collaboration quietly intensified. American historian Dr. Mark Ellison, working through the National Archives, uncovered a cache of film labeled JPP Bio 12, containing identical real identifiers to Nakamura's discovery. Among the frames were autopsy photographs of unidentified subjects, annotated in English and Japanese. Margins contained typed notes referring to specimen class B16, recovered from controlled exposure test, Manila sector. Analysis of the writing style linked the reports to personnel once attached to the U.S. Army's Fort Detrick Biological Warfare Center. In 2020, Ellison released a redacted excerpt of the report. It described a project exploring hemorrhagic vectors for controlled immunity study. The data suggested deliberate infection of prisoners with genetically modified strains of filoviruses decades before such organisms were formally identified. Soon after publication, Ellison's website was removed by court order citing violation of the International Security Act. He left academia shortly thereafter and has not been located since 2022. That same year, a declassified fragment from the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff archives confirmed that biological reference data obtained under Liaison Manila Agreement contributed directly to the establishment of Program Kestrel 1952. Kestrel was later revealed as an early U.S. project in biological aerosol dispersal research. The ethical implications were staggering. The West had allegedly weaponized data derived from human experimentation, while publicly prosecuting similar acts at Nuremberg. In 2023, a whistleblower within Japan's Ministry of Health leaked an internal inventory list titled Confidential Materials Returned to U.S. Custody, 1956. Among them, 731B Tissue Series, 22 units, and GHQ SCAP Field Documentation Reel, 04731B. The existence of a formal repatriation program confirmed that both governments knew precisely what had been preserved. Modern analysis of one surviving microfilm fragment, smuggled by Nakamura before the seizure, revealed something even darker. The frame contained a table of test variables, exposure duration, humidity, dispersal agent, and a handwritten note in English. Replication trials approved for tropical atmospheric test. Reformorgenröte. That final word, scribbled in faint graphite, connected the post-war biological tests to the Rügen experiments unearthed years later. In late 2024, under pressure from human rights organizations, Japan's National Diet Committee convened a closed hearing regarding archival irregularities concerning wartime and post-war human experimentation. The official minutes, later leaked, revealed testimony from an elderly ministry official who stated that foreign observers from GHQ monitored all tests and that biological continuity with pre-surrender research was necessary for national security alignment. He was not charged. The most damning revelation came from a final classified appendix to the Diet hearing. It included translated excerpts of a document titled U.S. Army Far East Command Report, 731B Summary Evaluation, July 1953. The final paragraph reads, Field data integration successful. recommend further application under Project HALO atmospheric trials. The linkage to Operation Glass Veil and the HALO devices left no doubt. Biological and atmospheric research had merged under a single covert framework spanning continents and decades. Today, references to Unit 731B have all but vanished from digital databases. The Ministry of Health denies holding any relevant materials, and US agencies classify all records pertaining to Project Kestrel. But scattered across university archives, in mislabeled crates and forgotten microfilm, lie fragments of a truth neither government dares confront: that the atrocities of war did not end with peace, only evolved, buried under layers of collaboration, redaction, and the illusion of post-war justice. Chapter 5: Echoes Beneath the Red Lake. By early 2025, Red Lake in northern Karelia had become a closed zone, its coordinates wiped from public mapping databases, airspace restricted under the pretense of forest fire recovery. Yet satellite images captured before the blackout showed unmistakable signs of human activity: cleared snow tracks leading to concrete ventilation shafts, heavy machinery positioned around the central depression, and faint thermal plumes escaping from what should have been frozen ground. Though the Finnish Ministry of Defense claimed these were part of an environmental containment operation, independent analysts from Helsinki University noted the presence of electromagnetic interference across local communication bands. For nearly 30 kilometers, shortwave frequencies fluctuated at precise intervals, 12.4 Hz, identical to the pulse recorded from the recovered crate labeled Unified Field Resonance. The operation's timing was no coincidence. 2 months earlier, a decrypted data leak from the European Security Archive had exposed a joint NATO-Russian technical working group established in 2021 under the codename Concordia, officially tasked with post-Cold War decontamination and data harmonization. Its unredacted mission statement referred to the stabilization of trans-atmospheric legacy systems. The phrase was nearly identical to one found in declassified Soviet memos on Project MIR-7, the same program that once operated beneath Red Lake. The convergence of modern political cooperation and Cold War secrecy signaled that something more than contamination control was underway. Journalist Ilkka Saarinen, who had been following the Red Lake narrative since 2023, managed to obtain a leaked field report from a subcontractor affiliated with Concordia's logistics division, labeled Interim Survey, Object 643K, Phase 2. The report described reactivation of auxiliary generators, unexpected, current feedback from the sublevel, array, and a directive to synchronize legacy control grid with NATO diagnostic systems. The language was unmistakably technical. This was not containment, but reinitialization. Saarinen contacted his longtime informant, an ex-Russian communications engineer living in Tallinn under the pseudonym Andrei, who confirmed the term control grid was Cold War jargon for ionospheric modulation arrays. If they're syncing it, Andrei warned, they're turning it back on. Meanwhile, in Washington, a Quiet Freedom of Information Act appeal, filed years earlier by historian Dr. Mark Ellison, before his disappearance, was finally granted in part. The release material, dated 1969, included correspondence between the US Defense Communications Agency and the Soviet Ministry of Radio Industry regarding mutual containment protocols following the Red Lake incident. Both sides acknowledged residual field resonance from a shared test platform originating pre-1945. The last page bore the stamp Morgenröte integration sequence. Completed. The implication was chilling. Whatever had been buried under Red Lake was not Soviet in origin. It was inherited. On the night of February 14, 2025, seismic sensors in Karelia registered a shallow tremor centered directly beneath the Red Lake exclusion zone. The Finnish Geological Survey recorded no tectonic explanation. Locals in nearby Kostamuksha reported an unnatural low-frequency hum that persisted for nearly 10 minutes, followed by the abrupt failure of power grids across the region. Amateur radio operators later confirmed bursts of structured signal interference echoing at exact 12.4 Hz intervals, identical to the pattern first detected in 2023. When mapped spectrally, the bursts formed repeating structures resembling language modulation rather than random noise. Within a week, all monitoring equipment within a 20-kilometer radius was confiscated by joint NATO-Russian security forces. Concordia issued a brief statement attributing the event to a groundwater detonation of trapped methane. However, Newly surfaced imagery from a European Space Agency thermal satellite revealed an expanding heat signature under the lake's ice, consistent with an active power source. The temperature increase was precise, rhythmic, and patterned, as if pulsing in response to an external signal. From the shadows of these developments, an encrypted communication surfaced on the dark web. Under the handle RDLK Witness, it contained a single compressed audio file dated March 1st, 2025. The accompanying message read, "From below, they've started broadcasting again." When decrypted, the file played 37 seconds of static, punctuated by intermittent clicks and tones, each aligning perfectly with the cadence of a human voice filtered through deep distortion. Acoustic analysis by amateur researchers suggested phonetic structures corresponding to both German and Russian syllables. The waveform signature matched fragments from the recovered Morgenröte and Halo documentation. At 02:14 UTC on March 9th, the pulse ceased. Monitoring stations across Finland, Norway, and Western Russia all recorded the same event. A sudden frequency collapse followed by an absence of signal, then a short burst lasting precisely 5 seconds. It contained one identifiable phrase, confirmed by multiple spectrographic reconstructions. Versuch fortgesetzt. Translation: experiment continued. In the aftermath, Red Lake was permanently sealed. Official statements cite radioactive instability as the cause of the closure. Yet anonymous sources within the Finnish Defence Intelligence Service confirmed the existence of a classified interim report, RDLK-25A, summarizing residual readings from the lakebed's surface. The final line reads, "Resonance field now autonomous. Unknown modulation origin." By April 2025, Concordia disbanded without explanation. All associated personnel were reassigned or disappeared. Independent researchers tracking shortwave frequencies report sporadic reappearances of the 12.4 Hz pulse, transient, faint but global, as if the system beneath the ice had begun to use the planet itself as a conductor. In private forums, historians of secret warfare debate whether Morgenröte, Halo, and MIR-7 were ever weapons in the conventional sense, or prototypes of a resonance technology meant to alter the very medium through which war was fought. For now, Red Lake remains silent. But those who have heard the recovered transmission claim that silence is not the end, only the pause between signals, and somewhere beneath the frozen ground, in the buried chambers of Object 643K, the unified field hums faintly, still waiting for the next synchronization command.